Hello. Coming up, we'll explore the effects of working remotely, future risk and planning, touching on what has worked and what hasn't, the elevated cyber risk associated with firm and client interaction, and finally, how do companies emerge from this pandemic stronger? I'm Les Nettleton, and these are just some of the topics we'll be exploring in this December's monthly Cybersecurity Advisory. Welcome to the Go Beyond Disruption podcast, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, the unified voice of the AICPA and CIMA. Each week, you'll get insights from inside the accounting and finance profession that help you stay ahead of the curve, whatever your business and wherever you're based. In the hosting seat this week, I'm Les Nettleton, Director of Information Technology Services with Bourgeois Bennet CPAs and Consultants based in New Orleans, Louisiana. Our topic this week is working remotely, future risk and planning. And joining me to explore it are Paul Perry, a member with Warren Averett, and Emily DiNardo, Senior Manager with BakerTilly. Welcome to both of you. Before we get into the discussion, I'll ask each of you to tell us something about yourself, where you're based, something about the kind of work you do, and why today's topic is particularly important. So, Paul, go ahead and get us started.
Les, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be a part of the conversation. My name is Paul Perry. I'm a member at Warren Averett. I'm the practice leader for our security risk and controls group. So anything controls based, our group handles IT reviews, SOC reports, cybersecurity exams, internal audit, internal controls. So that's really what we focus on. And I am based in our Birmingham, Alabama location. And again, just happy to be here.
Fantastic. How about you, Emily? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, my name is Emily DiNardo. I'm a senior manager at BakerTilly. BakerTilly is an advisory tax and assurance firm. We are headquartered in Chicago, Illinois. I'm actually out of our Milwaukee, Wisconsin office. So as of right now, December 21st, it's a little chilly here today. With the practice, I'm with our risk advisory. And I'm a quality reviewer for quite a few technology frameworks such as ISO 27001, HITRUST, and System Organization Controls or SOC reporting. Glad to be here today.
And welcome to both y'all. So let's go ahead and get started. Paul, at the start of 2020, the process of remote connectivity to our companies took hold. During 2020, cyber threats have continued to climb, even though a lot of companies have put in security awareness and training. Why does it seem that all the security awareness training isn't doing enough good for keeping companies secure?
Well, Les, when you talk about security awareness training, it's important to talk about the culture that you're creating within your organizations. And cybersecurity is a people problem. It's not a technology problem. It's the people and their actions throughout a day that really cause the breaches or what we learn about in the news as it relates to cybersecurity incidences. It's that human error factor, right? Whether it's intended or not intended. And most of the time, the not intended ones are the ones that it's hard to train on. And I would say that when it comes to security awareness training, it is definitely something that needs to be an ongoing process. A lot of organizations we find will say, yeah, we had a conversation last year about this, or yes, this is something we've talked about in the past. We don't feel like we need to talk about it again. And I liken security awareness training to something you have to do at least quarterly. You just have to continue the conversation. And when you continue that conversation, it really creates a culture of awareness within our businesses. But I would say in society as a whole, we have a choice when we are doing something, when we're taking an action, and that choice is convenience or privacy. And we always tend to focus on convenience. Helps us get our day done better. And we really need to start focusing on the privacy side of things. So security awareness training is, while it is effective, to make it more effective, it has to be continued. Emily, any follow-up to that?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I completely agree with your sentiments on training and human behavior. Cybersecurity, it can't be a chore. You have to want your employees to embrace it. I've seen some successful programs that are more along the lines of leading the horse with a carrot rather than a stick, which means that it's rewards based rather than receiving a nasty gram from your compliance or your IT department, or even worse, some type of formal sanctions process as it relates to it. These rewards-based programs are usually more engaging, interactive with games and prizes as you continue to address the cyber quiz questions correctly, and they make you feel better about yourself. But these engaging programs, they're not necessarily annual or one and done. They're along the lines of monthly or more gradual throughout the year.
Let's touch on vendor management, specifically third and fourth party vendors. Why has the risk increased so much with vendors and outsourcing?
I'll probably address that from a SOC perspective or control standpoint. There are a few reasons risk has increased and not attributable to one main element. In general, vendor management and many other cost departments took an initial backseat when COVID hit, due to the amount of furloughs, layoffs that have occurred since COVID. SOC at some clients, we've seen it, and even our clients' vendors, has been delayed in the execution of those reports. For example, a SOC reporting period ending June 30th may usually go out around the middle of August, which is 45 days after the period end. However, is now going out a month or more later than that. And, now this has not affected all of our SOC organizations or service organizations, but especially when these layoffs have affected the service organization project manager of that SOC report, or now additional duties are added to the project manager due to other layoffs in the service organization. Also, from the repercussion of COVID, that we've seen an increase in control findings, unfortunately, for some vendors as it relates to design failures, operating effectiveness failures as well. One obvious factor is physical security, as most companies went from working in their corporate buildings to being completely remote. Organizations should really revisit their physical access and physical security access policies and ensure any updates are communicated to their employees. Other issues we have run into due to furloughs, layoffs, have been an increase in the lack of segregation of duties across the board as it relates to requirements of dual sign-offs. We have seen employees actually QAing their own work due to not enough experienced senior employees or layoffs. What is the point of a QA then if you are reviewing your own work? In general, we've just seen a lack of employees to execute as backup for administrative privileges too, which also causes segregation of duties. Other internal control issues are delays in the background checks due to credit checks taking longer. And for a period of time, the courts were closed. So background checks kind of had a pause on that portion of the background check. And then lastly, just new systems being implemented and being misconfigured, or increase in lack of training on the newly implemented system, which would result in obviously a design issue. Internal controls are just oftentimes thought of as a nice to have, especially if your organization isn't in a highly regulated industry, but can leave really just shocking effects when the lack of internal control starts seeping into material misstatements with your financial statements. And this becomes a more serious issue when your SOC report is being relied upon by other financial statement auditors so they can complete the user entity's financial statements, and becomes critical when these are public companies that require PCAOB filings of financial statements. And it's more of a trickle-down effect. Now, just spilling into your user entity's financial statement audit, possibly causing updates to the decrease on the reliance of controls and the increase of substantive testing for the audit, which leads to more costly fees. And we all know our clients do not want that. Paul, not sure if you had any echoing statements as it relates to that as well.
Absolutely, Emily. And I think you did a good job of communicating kind of the details of SOC reports. I will answer that question less from another side. We work with a lot of small to mid-sized companies who do not even do any kind of vendor management, not from a lack of understanding sometimes. Sometimes it's a lack of just time, right? Or it is a lack of owning responsibility. Sometimes we say that you can outsource processes all day long, but you can't outsource the responsibility of knowing who you're using. And I would say that is one of the other issues that comes inside vendor management is the companies that do not look at their third parties or just head in the sand mentality. They're handling it. I don't have to worry about it. You want to know that your third party isn't just one guy in his basement with no security. You want to know that your third party has the controls in place that Emily talked about. And a lot of organizations just do not do that kind of review. And then when you talk about regulated entities or regulated industries, a lot of the third parties and fourth parties are not as regulated as, let's say, financial institutions or healthcare organizations. And so they may not have the same standards upon which to review the controls or to even understand what controls they have in place. So I would say that the outside of those deficiencies that Emily talked about, I think the other deficiency is just not doing anything. And to me, that's not a way to run a business. You got to know who you're working with, and you got to know who they're working with. I mean, fourth parties and fifth parties is not something that most people that have a robust vendor management even think about, because they're relying on their third party to do vendor management as well. And if they don't have controls in place around that, then it may be on you to look at those fourth parties. And those fourth parties may be in another country. They may not be somebody you've ever heard of before. And so vendor management is all about educating yourself on who you're using. And it's important to just kind of understand that.
My firm has a large audit department that has been working in clients' offices for years. Paul, why has the more remote workplace expanded risks exponentially when some aspects of our business have been remote for years?
On or about March 16th of 2020, everybody dispersed, and we went from very secure locations. We went from supervised employees, all industries, the accounting industry, all of our clients. All of a sudden now you have all the work being done in unsecure locations. To some degree, you have it done by unsupervised employees who aren't being watched every single day. And so all of a sudden, remote takes on a whole new form. And from an SOC perspective or a controls perspective, I now have to rely on what somebody is doing, maybe at their dining room table, maybe in the corner of their bedroom, from a controls perspective around their business. And now I don't know who comes into those houses on the weekends. Now I don't know who is around those locations throughout the day. And so we went from very secured locations, very supervised employees, to the absolute opposite of that, one end of the spectrum to the other. Something that Emily talked about was around vendors putting in new software. Well, on or about March 16th of 2020, there was new software that everybody had to use from all different aspects of industry. And the technology learning curve was not there. And you probably have people sharing their screen when they shouldn't be. You probably have people recording something when they shouldn't be. And so now it is literally one guy in their basement working on stuff. And how do I know that it's secure? And how do I know that my information isn't being compromised more than it has been? And I think that that's really why the risks have expounded exponentially as we talk remote. Now, we've got to think about this going forward, because there are some aspects of the remote workplace that we like and we want to keep. And there are some employees that want to do this a little bit more than others. So now we've got to take all of our employees and we got to say, okay, if you're going to be remote, here are things you can and cannot do. That may be different than our employees that are going to be coming back into the offices. But it's really just important to understand what your risks are. And your risks are now unsecured locations and unsupervised employees. And you've got to put in new controls to respond to that. Maybe you've got to have educational sessions on Wi-Fi routers and how you secure them a little bit better, or not using public Wi-Fi when you're getting out of your house and going to sit at a coffee shop to work. So it's really important to kind of understand those risks and why it's different than what people would say is the remote auditing of the past.
Emily, in talking about remote environments, I'd have to suspect that you aren't necessarily going on site to a lot of your clients to conduct audits. What, if anything, have you seen as an increase of tools being utilized?
Great question. And yes, I have not traveled to a client since March when when I usually travel every other week for my clients. I think it should start with, what are your company's internal policies as it relates to these collaboration and document repository sites? Can your company utilize your audit firm's tool, or does your company require you to use your internal secure file transfer protocol, or SFTP server? Prior to COVID, some of our clients would still, in a very small amount, would use USB drive for documents, password protected USB drives, I should say. But these were already becoming far less used due to lack of domain access rights that companies have with their laptops, which is an excellent control to have from both the client and audit firm perspective, because it limits what apps and tools you can download as a business user. However, the outcome is a nuance for the business user and additional help desk support, which I believe the outcome outweighs the drawbacks. Benefits of using a client SFTP server is that your company has control, as it's located within your infrastructure, and vendors and third parties are not necessarily involved or relied upon. Thus, you know exactly where your data is located. Your data is also removed timely and not necessarily archived. This can also be a downfall, though, if you are not organized and can't remember what you previously provided to your auditor. So you need to ensure internally, from a project management point of view, you know what documents to provide. SFTP sites also require your company to internally manage the site and thus have the resources and technology available to host. If not using an SFTP server, there are many, many options of document repository sites, such as Dropbox, Huddle, Confluence, just to name a few. Some of these sites, both the client or the auditor can administer access. The key to remember with these sites are they are third-party vendors, but you are administrating the access and you're managing the files. If you don't remove the files, your data, they are maintained on there until you delete them, essentially forever if you're not careful. Also, if you do elect to use these vendors, ensure you are requiring these companies to provide their vendor due diligence, compliance reports, FedRAMP certification, ISO 27000, SOC reports, high trust, anything. If you think about it, these vendors have a lot of information about your company, whether you're using these sites for a financial statement audit, and they have all of your customer information relating to invoicing and revenue, or from a compliance point of view, audit, and have information on the type of SIM tool you're using, which, just due to the timing of this podcast being the end of December 2020, hopefully it is in SolarWinds. Other compliance guidelines as it relates to data protection will need to be considered as well for GDPR and CCPA as well. Basically, whether using an in-house tool or a vendor tool, there will be drawbacks and benefits that will have to be evaluated.
Paul mentioned earlier about technology learning curves. Are you seeing any increase in vulnerabilities within the technologies you're auditing?
Well, I did mention earlier about the SolarWinds compromise, but because that is still being investigated, I really don't want to touch on that too much, given it's the end of December. But we've seen an increase in the frequency of vulnerability scanning. So vulnerability scanning identifies systems that are subject to known vulnerabilities, but it doesn't exploit the flaws or compromise security. I think the reason for the increase in these scans is more pressure on our clients, such as right to audit clauses in contracts, ensuring they have internal controls in place, and just keeping up with the speed of technology. It's really important for these scans to be internally and externally assessed, or what is called authenticated and unauthenticated. So an authenticated tester performs the scan as an intruder without trusted access to network, and would show vulnerabilities that can be accessed without logging into the network, and pinpoints specific IP addresses. And then an authenticated tester logs in as a network user, revealing vulnerabilities that are just accessible to a trusted user. So with that said, what we are seeing is that a lot of companies are just trying to comply with the key control and meet the baseline requirement of, did you do a vulnerability scan? But until you test your systems from every possible perspective and access point, you can't say with reasonable assurance you've covered all known vulnerabilities, which is why performing both scans is always recommended. Paul, not sure if you have any follow-up on the vulnerability scanning or risk assessments as it relates to vulnerability scans and the review of those.
I do, Emily, and I appreciate that. And I do sympathize here at the end of December 2020 with our colleagues at SolarWinds. Hopefully they're getting what they need done. I think not to harp on that and not to talk about it, but it shows that we're all vulnerable, and it shows that some companies have asked, well, how would I have known this? And maybe there's not anything we could have done from a using them perspective. It's this is a whole different conversation than what we're probably used to talking about with our clients. And so I think it bears understanding that there's just some things some of those things it is what it is, and we have to deal with it. And knowing your risks, I think, is the piece that I would mention here is vulnerability scans and penetration tests are knowing what's inside your system, knowing what's connected, knowing what's needs to be updated, knowing how people can get in. And that's just one risk that you may have within your organization. So I think the recommendation here is just doing an overall risk assessment, sitting down and saying, what can go wrong with our organization? And specifically, what do we have in place to combat that? And I think that's part of the overall risk assessment that people should do. Again, I work with a lot of small to mid-sized companies who just don't have the time or the manpower to do some of those. And so when I ask, how do you know what risks you have? I get the deer in the headlight look sometimes. And it's, sit down and, even if you know what controls you have in place, reverse engineer that risk assessment. Say, I'm using this application, or we have these controls, these key controls in place. Now, what is that trying to prevent? That helps me understand the risk that it's associated with, or the threat. When I do see people do risk assessments, maybe not the best way they can do it, they're usually not involving anybody outside of IT. And risks are everybody's issues because we're all dealing with it every single day. And so I think it's important to bring everybody from different aspects of the organization to the table to say, okay, what risks are we combating? And then when a breach happens, are we going back and are we reviewing that annual review? And that's where protecting yourself is half the battle. The other half is how you respond when something happens, and are you prepared for that? The preparation for a response to an incident is a control in itself. And it's definitely something that should be part of your controls in place to combat risks and threats to your organization. So it's definitely looking at everything, vulnerability scans, penetration tests. That is one aspect of understanding the vulnerabilities and the risks. But you got to look at the human side of it too, like we've talked about as well.
All right, here we are at the end of 2020. Been quite a year. So a closing question to both of you. What do you think people need to be thinking about going into 2021 from a technology perspective?
Thanks, Les. I would say one of the things that we've learned in 2020 is that no matter what's going on, you're not the only one going through it. No matter what software you're using, you're not the only one that's implemented it. And so collaboration at that point becomes very crucial, I think. In industry, in businesses, we sometimes think about our competitors as enemies, and I don't want to share too much with them. But when it comes to security, and I would think that anybody in our industry of security would say the rising tide mentality, right? So if I know of something that can stop a threat from attacking my organization, and I know 5 or 6 other businesses that are using the same software or have the same potential risk, and I see something, I need to share that. And I think collaboration is how we are going to get through this together. The government's there to help. Now, I get what all's going on here at the end of December 2020, but the industry of cybersecurity, everybody from all aspects has come together and said, how can we help? What do we know? What can we share? What's able to be shared? And how can we make this better going forward? How can we respond? And collaboration is definitely what I think people need to think about going forward, especially into 2021, is, hey, when you get stuck on something, when you see something bad, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Share it amongst your competitors. Share it amongst your friends. Because if we all do our part in this space of cybersecurity, then hopefully we can do a better job than the threat actors. And I think that's the biggest piece, is trying to keep up with the threat actors and what they have going on. And collectively, we just all have to come together and really help each other out. So that's what I would say for thinking about 2021 and what we do differently.
Great response, Paul. I agree. Collaboration is going to be key for 2021. I'm looking back at 2019. I 100% think we did not take advantage of the technology our firms were leveraging. Now, looking back at 2020, after living in this world of cyber and remote work, I don't think that was the case at all. And we took on 2020 full force with our existing platforms and systems and new tools and upgrades that we had to purchase, at least for many, many of us. I hope we can only get smarter with the technology we are using and even the tech that hasn't even been invented yet. However, I really hope in 2021 I can visit a client again in person, whether I shake their hand, bump elbows, or even give them a hug. I don't think the human race was built to be isolated.
Fantastic stuff. And before we get started on our holiday break, if you want to explore this information further, Paul and Emily, can you give us some links to any resources that you find topical?
Thanks, Les. Really quick, I would say that educating yourself, there's enough articles out there, some put out by the AICPA, some put out by federal law enforcement agencies. You can just start Googling cybersecurity breaches or concerns, and there's a bunch to read. And I think that's part of what we need to do as a society, is just continually educate ourselves on what's going on so that we're up to speed. So, just find those articles and read them on a consistent basis.
And going off of Paul's sentiments, the AICPA is releasing a quarterly newsletter called The Eye on Technology. And I think that article, which I believe Paul and myself have both helped work on, is really eye-opening for 2020. It goes over what we've seen in 2020, and then it will be released throughout 2021 as well.
And if you want to take a look, the links to these resources will be in the show notes. That's it for this month's Cybersecurity Advisory edition of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. My thanks to my co-presenters, Paul Perry and Emily DiNardo. If you'd like to connect with them, we'll put their profile links into our show notes. To view these notes, just tap on this episode's info icon in the podcast app on your smartphone or tablet. You can also open this episode in your computer's web browser. That's where you'll find further information and links about today's topic, including the online resources we mentioned during our discussion. Remember to have a look at our archive of back episodes too. More than 130 of those are at your fingertips whenever you want, provided with our compliments. You can find them wherever you already get your podcast or your music, or simply go visit gobeyonddisruption.com. That's gobeyonddisruption.com. From New Orleans, Louisiana, I'm Les Nettleton, wishing you a wonderful holiday, a happy new year, and we look forward to seeing you in 2021. Till next time, keep listening and keep safe. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Disruption, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Learn more about today's topic at AICPA-CIMA.com/disruption. This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. It is provided with the understanding that the association, its affiliates, and subsidiaries are not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The association, its subsidiaries, and affiliates make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to and assume no responsibility for the content or application of the material contained herein, and expressly disclaim all liability for such damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.